Sasle Masagarai. I'm a Senior Market Engagement Manager in our Mobile for Development work at the GSMA. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to join you today. This session will be an opportunity for you to learn more about the GSMA Innovation Fund for Digital Urban Services with regards to the water sector. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us. So just to recap the agenda of the session, we will spend the next about 15 minutes giving you an overview of our organization, the GSMA, for those who don't know about it, as well as going through some highlights or high-level overview of the fund. So for those that have attended our previous sessions, that might seem a little repetitive. And then we'll spend another 10 or so minutes diving a little into digital innovations in water sector in terms of our view of the challenge and sharing a bit more about the learning agenda for the Innovation Fund with regards to the water sector. We will then spend another 30 minutes on a panel discussion with presenters or speakers from Imagine H2O Asia and Adura International, as well as Drinkwell and water supply and sanitation specialists from the World Bank. Thank you so much for joining us, and we welcome our speakers. And finally, we'll spend the last 10 minutes wrapping up and answering additional questions that you may have about the fund. So just before we kick in, just some housekeeping. You can send your questions through the question and answer part of your BlueJeans screen. We will answer those questions throughout the session as well as towards the end of the session. So let's get started. Just for those who don't know about the GSMA, we are a member organization with membership from 750 mobile operator members and over 400 companies in the broader mobile ecosystem. GSMA is involved in a wide range of activities through advocacy, events, research, and insights. And just to talk a little bit about our Mobile for Development unit of the GSMA, we drive innovation in digital technologies to reduce inequalities in our world. Mobile for Development works within the mobile ecosystem and the development sector, advancing the use of mobile technology, connected devices, and other digital tools so they can make a positive difference to the planet and millions of lives. We have had a large-scale impact with close to 100 million people impacted through our work and that of our partners. None of this work would be possible without support from donors, and in particular, the UK's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. On the next slide, just a bit of an overview of the programs that are involved in this fund. So Mobile for Development covers different thematic topics run through several Mobile for Development programs. The topics relevant to this fund are run by two programs, as you can see on the screen. The Digital Utilities Program, which supports urban resilience in low and middle income countries by enabling access to essential utility services through digital solutions. And the Climate Tech Program, which unlocks the power of digital technology to create a low carbon and climate resilient future. So these programs achieve their work through a number of activities, including de-risking and catalyzing innovation, research and insights, partnership facilitation and convening, and providing technical advisory to stakeholders. On the next slide, so the GSMA Innovation Fund, Mobile for Development has 10 years of experience running innovation funds on a multitude of topics. And our approach has always been to fund projects that are inclusive, have a clear socio-economic impact, and are working towards commercial sustainability and have the potential to reach end users at scale. On the next slide, the current round of Innovation Fund, which we announced last month, is the GSMA Innovation Fund for Digital Urban Services. And this fund seeks to scale digital solutions that provide essential urban services to underserved populations from low and middle income countries in Africa and South and Southeast Asia. So why this particular focus? Urban services such as energy, water, sanitation, and plastics and waste management are essential to the well-being of city dwellers and the resilience of cities, particularly amidst a changing climate. While there has been a historic rise in mobile connectivity in low and middle income countries, and particularly in cities, billions of people still lack access to these basic services. And with rapidly expanding informal settlements across Africa and Asia, where 90% of global urban growth from now until 2050 will be concentrated, water shortages, unsanitary conditions, unreliable power provision, and inadequate waste management would remain a defining reality for many. To tackle these challenges, the local private sector can play an important role in leveraging digital technology and working with mobile operators and the public sector to deliver sustainable and equitable services. On the next slide, just to give you high-level objectives of the fund. The fund will demonstrate how digital technology, including mobile, can support and scale the delivery of urban services to underserved populations. It will also demonstrate the socio-economic, commercial, and environmental and climate impact of digital urban services. It will also demonstrate the business and/or partnership models required to enable digital urban services to be adopted at scale. And it will demonstrate how partnerships with mobile operators and other technology companies can improve the scale and sustainability of digital urban services. On the next slide, just to give you an overview of the support provided through this fund, there is grant funding between £100,000 and £250,000 to support projects running over 15 to 18 months period. There is a matching component that's required, so please review the terms and conditions to be able to understand this better. Boot camps and regular online clinics on topics such as product or service improvement, human-centered design and usability testings will also be prepared. Learning exchange opportunities with other grantees and networking opportunities with other GSMA partners. Through our monitoring and evaluation team, we'll also provide support to evidence socio-economic impact and promote product development. There is also facilitation of relationships with mobile operators and public sector organizations where relevant. And finally, opportunities to increase your visibility and raising your profile to potential investors and other partners through profiling in GSMA events, publications, and social media. To give you an overview of the eligibility criteria, if you're a startup, a small to medium-sized private sector company, or a social enterprise, you're eligible to apply for the fund, and that you can demonstrate the long-term sustainability and scalability of the innovation beyond the lifespan of the grant. And if you have active users and revenue in at least one eligible low or middle income countries. The following organizations are not eligible to apply for the fund: governments or appointed government agencies, mobile operators, university or academic organizations, startups, accelerators, and incubators. However, partnerships with these organizations are highly encouraged. Please review our partnership or downstream partnership policy, which is part of the terms and conditions. In terms of geography, low and middle income countries in Africa, South and Southeast Asia are eligible to apply. Again, some exclusions apply. Please see terms and conditions. On the next slide, just to give you an overview of key dates. So the fund launched last month. We've run a fund introduction webinar last week. The recording is again available on the fund website. And this week we are covering sector deep dives. We started with plastics and waste management on Monday. Tuesday we covered sanitation. Today we are covering water, and finally energy tomorrow. All recordings will also be available through the fund website. Finally, the fund will, the pitch submission stage will close on 2nd July. So that's a key date to remember. Between August 2nd and 5th November is the proposal stage, where shortlisted applicants submit a full project proposal, which includes technical proposal, project implementation plan, and a budget. I will now hand over to my colleague, Zach, to lead the next part of the session, which focuses on sector-specific insights, as well as the panel discussion. Over to you, Zach.
Thanks, Lema, and good morning or afternoon to everyone joining. Pleased to be with you today So I'm going to take us through the middle part of this session, which will be about 10 minutes of me presenting on some of how we see digital water, and then I'll be joined by an excellent panel of speakers to discuss some of the issues. So turning to the next slide and an introduction to digital water. Could I have the slide, please? Thanks. So I'm going to start by discussing some of the critical challenges that we see in urban water. And I think for many of us on the call, these will be really well rehearsed, but I think it's important to start with them because really this is what the innovation funding is behind. And we place a high premium on the solutions that can really address some of these huge challenges that we're facing. So starting with access to services and inequity in access. I think we know that access to water in urban areas is high, but we also know that the majority of those without services are from low-income areas or low-income households. But the real dimensions of inequity in urban water focus on service quality and the price that people pay. A study by World Resources Institute in 15 countries found that tanker water was on average 10 times more expensive than central services. And in some cities, such as Mumbai, this goes up to 52 times more expensive. There's also inequity in terms of how much is paid for services. Centralized services delivered by utilities and municipalities are often much more affordable than those delivered by the informal or private sector. And this is linked in part to the funding and financing, because water is one of the most heavily subsidized sectors in the world, but we know that those subsidies generally flow to the higher wealth quintiles. A World Bank study found that 56% of subsidies are captured by the top wealth quintile, while only 6% reach the bottom. And a lot of the reason for this inequity is related to, in financing, is related to the service and delivery models available and the fact that centralized services and those utility providers don't have the tools and means to deliver services to low-income households. Secondly, a huge challenge that we're all facing is related to scarcity. We know that at the moment, nearly a quarter of the world's population live in countries that face extremely high baseline water stress, defined as when 80% of the available water resources are abstracted in any one year. This is just going to accelerate with climate change and urbanization, and we're increasingly seeing day zero situations in cities and towns all around the world, none of which receives the attention that Cape Town did in 2018. Finally, the urban population growth that we're seeing is going to compound these challenges in terms of needing to rapidly expand cities. And this is particularly marked in African countries, where we expect the urban population to double to 1.2 billion in 2015 from a baseline of just over 500 million people in 2015. In 2015, 450 million of those living in urban areas had access to basic services, but only 100 million or so had access to piped water. This means that alongside the challenge of scarcity, we're also going to need to rapidly expand services to meet the needs of urban populations. A third major challenge is on the financial pressures, and these are those faced both by utilities as well as households. The best available data suggests that only about a third of utilities globally collect sufficient revenue to cover their operations and maintenance costs. This leaves them with very little room to invest in maintaining or upgrading services. Similarly, households, especially those not served by centralized services, find that safe water is unaffordable. Pardon me. Finally, we have the issue of inefficiency, particularly with utilities and municipalities, and non-revenue water rates remain stubbornly high in a lot of contexts, usually between 30 or 50%. Addressing the technical losses, those caused by leaking pipes, or the commercial losses, all of the water that's not billed for, is essential to addressing those financial and scarcity problems that I mentioned above. So what we've seen in terms of how digital solutions can improve service delivery is by providing the real-time information through linked devices and IoT devices to give utilities much better information on leakages and consumptions that can help them better plan. Digital payments have also been transformational for many utilities in terms of improving their revenue collection. Combined with pay-as-you-go business models, these can make services more affordable to low-income households by allowing for micropayments. And they also ensure that there's predictable revenue collection in serving low-income areas for utilities and municipalities. Combined with models such as kiosks, these tools can be combined to ensure that we can expand services to low-income areas. Next, I'd like to turn the slide to discuss some of the use cases in digital water. These are centered around some of the key technologies that we've seen and also are seeing emerging and that have the real potential to transform things. So starting with voice, SMS and USSD functions, I think a lot of these services or these tools are easily overlooked as a lower level of digitization, but they're absolutely essential in terms of forming communication bridges between utilities and customers and building and maintaining that relationship to ensure that there's service quality and maintaining willingness to pay and customer satisfaction. They're also often a huge part of mobile billing, mobile payments, or accessing utility services without needing to go to an office. Secondly, we have mobile money and micropayments in the delivery of water, and as mentioned above, these pay-as-you-go services can make services more affordable for low-income customers and ensure that there's revenue collection for the utilities. Third, we have a broad grouping of IoT technologies, Internet of Things, machine-to-machine communication, and GIS tracking. These smart monitoring systems give utilities new data and abilities to plan and monitor services in real time. Combined with big data, AI, and machine learning, these enable the better planning of services in these rapidly urbanizing areas, as well as allowing the optimization of some processes to improve efficiency. For example, programming pumping stations to use grid electricity when the prices are low. Finally, all of the above could be combined in augmented and virtual reality to improve the ability of utility management. Next, I'd like to turn to what we've done in urban water and what this innovation fund to address. So in water, we've previously supported 14 grantees working in 11 countries. The areas include all of those that I've mentioned above, piloting and introducing digital payments into the sector, developing and supporting pay-as-you-go business models, the service monitoring, and suites of tools that support utility digitalization. If you want to read more about our past work, I'd point you to 3 reports. Intelligent Utilities for All is a very good summary of all of our past funding in water. And similarly, our report Digital Solutions for the Urban Poor discusses these in more detail. And finally, the report Scaling Digital Solutions in Urban Water looks at some of our past grantees' experiences in scaling their solutions across and within markets. Our grantees in water have gone on to raise nearly 10 million in follow-on funding within 2 years grant for us. This innovation fund really focuses on 3 key areas. The first is around tackling the barriers for these solutions scaled, and this is through forging partnerships with utilities and mobile operators. There's a lot of potential in the solutions that I've outlined above, and many of these have been funded in the past, but there is the need for the replication in different markets and for the business and partnership models really to find ways that it can work within the context of these utility financial constraints and in a way that serves low-income customers. The second key aim of the fund is really to build out the breadth and depth of the evidence around digital adoption in water. We know that this is absolutely essential in demonstrating the value of solutions when they need to be adopted in public procurement. And currently the evidence base is limited and needs to be strengthened in particular markets as well as globally. Finally, there is also the need to explore and test these very new technologies that are emerging in low and middle income countries and in a way that ensures that they improve services. So, I think that's it for my presentation. I'm now going to turn to introducing the three speakers that we have today. We're delighted to have them. They all bring with them a huge breadth of experience. Rodney Chapin is founder and CEO of Ardura International, which is a solutions-focused firm working in South and Southeast Asia. They specialize in bringing creative solutions that use innovative technology in water and environmental services. He also serves as an advisory council member for Imagine H2O Asia and is involved in pilot studies and deployment of their grantees throughout Southeast Asia. His background's in environmental engineering and he has 30 years of experience in North America, Asia Pacific and the Middle East. Welcome, Rodney, and thank you.
Thank you.
Second, we have Minaj Chowdhury, who's CEO and founder of Drinkwell. Drinkwell are a social enterprise that deliver water services through blended franchise business models. Founded in 2013, they've deployed over 400 systems across India and Bangladesh, providing over 10 million litres per month via public-private partnerships. One of Drinkwell's key solutions is water ATM with mobile-enabled payments, and such systems were deployed in partnership with the Dhaka Water and Sewage Authority in Bangladesh, something that GSMA grant supported in 2015. And finally, we have Odette Mushimpua, who is a water resource engineer with 15 years experience working in the sector. Since 2011, she's been with the World Bank, and she started her career at Eduardo Mondlane University in Mozambique, where she also worked as an engineering consultant and with the Ministry of Science and Technology. Since 2011, in her time with the bank, she supports operations and knowledge development in water, urban development, agriculture and environment in Southern and Eastern Africa. This is our panel. We're delighted to have you all today. What I'll do is I'll kick off the discussion with a couple of questions for each of the panelists, and then we'll turn to the Q&A. So throughout this, please do ask questions to us and the panel on the topic of digital water. Please also feel free to continue to ask questions about the fund and the fund application. In the last 10 minutes of the session, we'll turn to addressing those questions that relate to, the fund application. So, Rodney, I'd like to start with a few questions for you. So your work is supporting lots of grantees across Southeast Asia that work with Imagine H2O, both through that and your business of Ardura International. So I think two kind of linked questions. The first is, what are the trends that you're seeing across those markets and in your work? And what do you think is needed in terms of supporting digital innovations to scale? And with that, what do we still need to learn? Yes.
Well, thank you very much, Zach. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and to speak with this group. And I think, what I'll say to begin with is I think it's a very exciting time in the water sector and in this part of the world, in Southeast Asia, because we have this combination of solutions and technologies with the opportunities to impact these growing, developing countries. So it's quite exciting, and I think it's about time we get there in the water sector, right? I mean, we've seen some of these advancements in other sectors, and now I think in my entire 30-year career, it's I think moving faster right now than it ever has. So it's great to see, and I could talk for a long time, but I'll try to focus on a few trends that we're seeing that maybe apply a little more in this geography and exactly what we're seeing. And I think I'll start with what I would say those technologies and tools for analyzing information in real time, right? Whatever that is. I think we see that a lot of technologies now in analyzing assets in real time, whether those be pipe networks, sewer systems, through robotics and imaging technologies that are then applied digitally in real time and with real information overlaid with GIS and open source data. And then I think one of the really exciting areas is real-time quality monitoring or analyzing of water quality, whether it be aerial imaging or whether it be through surrogates to analyze, for example, arsenic, heavy metals in water and sewer systems, and to allow for, real-time or even early warning system type things, again, applied digitally in real time. And then I think we know about all the real-time metering and smart meters and all that. That, of course, goes along with it. And it's overlaid, again, by the open source information, whether it's satellite imagery, GIS, again, technologies using that type of information to connect to these other types of real-time data. And then I think what we're then seeing is how do we apply this, right? And we're seeing it applied with predictive analytics, as you mentioned in your slide, whether that be to solve the problem or improve the situation in non-revenue water. There are a lot of companies doing this with the predictive analytics, or whether that be to better manage the assets, pipe systems, and other things. Again, in this part of the world, we have 150-year-old systems that need to be monitored and improved in a cost-effective way. So these tools are really allowing us to do that. And then I think, of course, where it's going is that last piece that you mentioned, right? And this is probably one of the exciting pieces, is that the digital twins and AI, right, that we take from predictive analytics to operating in real time and seeing where that can take us. So there are many trends, but I think it's a combination of some of the analytical tools combined with this digitalization, right? Almost the digitalization of anything to apply it in the water sector. And then in terms of, what we need to do to scale, I think, it's quite obvious, but it's very important. We need to test and pilot these applications in the real world, and that requires funding, which is great. What GSMA and others are doing in this respect, because these really allow us to take that next step. But I think what's important for the entrepreneurs to remember is, while we're doing that application testing and then real world piloting, to understand who that customer is, where we best fit in the space, in geography, or in types of customers or applications, and focus always on moving it forward from a business perspective, so that we can gain that traction and then get to scale in that regard. And then, in terms of what we need to learn, I think, first of all, I'm extremely optimistic. As I said in the beginning, I think the potential is great. I think we will learn a lot in the near future because the bar is now being set high. But I think we always need to bring it back to applying a technical solution to provide an outcome that is really beneficial, whether that be improved service, increased revenue, extending coverage, or improving efficiency. So we always need to bring it back to applying in the real world to provide an outcome that's positive and impactful in the sector. So those are my thoughts. And again, thanks for having me.
Yeah, brilliant. I think some interesting themes that we'll pick up in the discussion. I think one thing that jumps out is the advanced solutions and linking those to outcomes, and then also maybe thinking about some of the differences between markets of the areas that you focus in South and Southeast Asia and other markets, and interesting themes on applicability. But I think we'll come back to those in the discussions, and in the meantime, if there's anything from the Q&A, we'll take audience questions before that. So turning now to Manoj. Manoj, we don't have your video on. Brilliant. So as mentioned before, you were a past grantee of the GSMA, and it was around your solution and partnership model in DWASA. So I was wondering if you could speak just a little bit about that. But I think my questions for you are related to your journey, and in terms of kind of where you were when you received the grant and now, and what advice you might have given to yourself, and also what advice you might give to others to make the best of a funding opportunity like this. And don't feel the need to pull your punches if there's anything you want to criticize us for. Yeah, over to you, Manoj.
Thanks so much, Zach. It's great to be here, an honor to be here with fellow co-panelists. I think, the best start would be to try to transport all of you to Dhaka, which is one of the most densely populated cities in the world. There's about 18 million people that live in the greater Dhaka area. And Dhaka Wasa, the water utility, is responsible for providing safe water and sanitation to these residents. Now, there's 4 million floaters. So these are people who basically don't have a fixed address. They are not having access to piped water. And so as a result, they are beyond the pipe. And so they don't have access to piped water. And so our partnership with Dhaka Wasa is a service delivery engagement to really give safe water to those beyond the pipe populations. And so the way we work is we have a build, own, operate partnership with Dhaka Wasa, where Dhaka Wasa will give us the land, water, electricity to set up water ATMs. And we will then provide the actual ATM infrastructure, and we'll operate and maintain it. And through this partnership, we, before GSMA, basically had small-scale pilots, and the GSMA Foundation grant funded 80 systems. And we're now actually operating a little over 200 ATMs, and we have a contract for 300. So we're basically continuing to scale that partnership. We did actually 18 million liters of water last month, despite COVID and the lockdown. And so in a high level, the partnership is very much something that was spurred by the GSMA application, actually, because one of the things that the application required was cost share. And I think the ability for us to go to Dhaka Wasa and say we have a potential partner who's willing to 50-50 fund a scale-up partnership really helped move the conversation along. But I would say in terms of advice I would give myself, I think the first thing that really comes to light is to really focus on retention. I think it's really easy to get carried away, especially when we were having conversations with the utility up front. We were really excited about integrating mobile money, but then quickly we realized that there's a lot of business challenges. Who's going to pay for the mobile money kind of tariff? How does the backend need to look? What does the API look like? And when we got lost in these more technical conversations, I found myself focused more on how to design a great workflow as opposed to, the most important thing, which is, are you retaining your customers? Are you churning your customers? If so, why are they churning? And so I think, frankly speaking, we didn't really focus our attention on retention and churn really until this calendar year, I would argue. And we didn't really look at cohort analysis. And I think if we had done that 3 years ago, we would have learned a lot about service delivery challenges. But 3 years ago, we were just so fixated on things like mobile money functionality, things like online customer recharge checks, downtime, which are important. But I think what we learned is that it's ultimately the customer who really wants to figure out which features are important and which will have them come back to get service. And second is that less is more. I've learned that, especially as we look at scaling, it's very tempting to have 6 to 10 KPIs spanning business, financial, social indicators. But ultimately, when it comes to applying for grants, applying for equity financing, when you have that kind of money slide, what you really have space for is one KPI that ideally is moving high and to the right. And if you have that, then naturally you need less negative, because that metric will ideally do all the talking for you. And as that metric continues to trend upwards, you're showing momentum and adoption, and that should really make it easy when it comes to raising your financing. We were just so inundated with all kinds of different features around water quality metrics, around downtime metrics, around customer user metrics that we really couldn't optimize on just one KPI. And I think that really muddled the narrative, if you will, because I think what I learned is that your time is finite and your resources are finite. So you're better served almost to focus on de-risking one aspect, perfecting that, and then moving on to the next. And then the final piece of advice I'd give myself is to really try and write a press release about your company 3 years from now, and then share that press release with your team, your board, your investors, because it gives a very vivid vision articulating where you want the company to be. And I think the practice of writing a press release will force some very interesting kind of decisions on what you think is important. You kind of work your way backwards. And I feel like if I had done that, we could have really focused our priorities on what was most important, kind of have that amazing press release about a key partnership or about a product innovation, as opposed to trying to do everything at once. So I found that that was a really clarifying kind of activity that, again, I did this year, but I wish I did really 3 years ago. With regard to the role GSMA played, I would say before the grant, I mean, it was really the cost share proposal that gave us the courage to approach Takawasa, who is always inundated with all kinds of social enterprises that have pilot proposals. But when we came to them and showed them a 50-50 cost share, where there was a potential to deploy 80 systems, that actually got them excited to say, okay, I don't have to just deal with a one-off deployment. I can actually get a decent amount of scale. And that was really possible just because of the structure of the application. And then during the grant, I would say the events really allow us to capture the mind share of utility officials. So there was an industry forum event in Sri Lanka. We were able to take our project director from Dhaka for a week to Sri Lanka. And what that really did is it gave us one-on-one time to really understand how the utility is thinking about our ATM deployment, what are the things that could be improved. And like what I've learned is a lot of these utility professionals are just inundated with their day-to-day. And when you can actually remove them and talk about innovation and talk about your product, you can actually build a relationship. And I found that anytime we were able to really have the GSMA platform convene us with our partners in different events, it gave us that time and space to really give the utility customer the bandwidth to deeply think about how we could develop, how we could deepen, and how we could really sustain our partnership. And I'd say after the grant, two really important things happened. The first was we had a really nice video done about our whole project. And it actually included testimonials from our utility, from our customers, the end users. It included a testimony from our mobile network operator partner. And anytime we're now talking to a new government agency, a new utility, we actually share that video. And it's just a very powerful kind of presentation that's very slick and polished that can basically communicate what we're trying to do in helping utilities serve the beyond the pipe population faster than any kind of one pager, because it's just so powerful with the testimonials. And building on that, you know, that's kind of the copy and kind of the multimedia, but more tactically, from a follow-up funding perspective, actually, the GSMA served as a great reference. We ended up raising a follow-on round from institutional investors, and the GSMA was a great reference check. Funny story, we even have our current board observer, who's the managing director at one of the institutional investors, was actually previously at the GSMA. And so there's like a very strong network and an ecosystem that the GSMA is very much a part of. And I think once you get that seal of approval from the GSMA Foundation, it really gives a lot of rewards when it comes to follow-on financing, just with the network that you're a part of.
Great. Well, thank you for that. And I think some really interesting topics in terms of, you know, once you're looking forward into the grant, you're really in the weeds and it's hard to see past it. But the benefit of hindsight in terms of keeping it simple and really focusing on those key outcomes, both for your business and people, really important message. I put out there. I see lots of questions coming in. Just to say that I'll save up a lot of the eligibility questions to address in one go at the end. I see my colleagues are also replying on those. And a really great question for Razul on never fail, never scale around solutions. I think I'll use that. I think we'll get to some of those questions and what others might come in after speaking with Odette. Because Odette, there's actually that scaling question that I want to address with you in terms of, you know, a lot of investments in a lot of countries do still rely on DFIs, and DFIs play a really central role. And you also have a unique role in terms of utilities and governments as your clients. So I wanted to ask you a kind of twin pair of questions around, you know, how you as the bank look at these digital solutions and how they feature in your work and funding, but also your perspectives on what innovators or other kind of social enterprises or companies need to do in terms of preparing themselves to scale and access some of those broader opportunities.
Okay. Thank you for inviting me, first of all, for inviting the bank. It's a great opportunity for us to sort of interact with some of the innovators and of course with the GSMA and the work that you guys are doing in sort of fostering innovation is really important, an important contribution for development. The bank has a number of investments across the globe working at the water sector. Just to give you some idea in terms of the scope of those investments, we do have, we have invested over $23 billion in terms of water investments across the globe in the past 10 years. And half of that has been in urban water supply and sanitation. That is more or less $1.1 billion average a year in terms of investments in urban water supply. And many of these projects do have elements of digitalization, or especially when it comes to enhancing utility efficiency and supporting these utilities and going an extra mile in reaching the unserved. We do also have a couple of initiatives, global initiatives, in which some of these projects are part of, but it also includes a couple of let's say knowledge development activities. One of them is the Utilities of the Future initiative. And this initiative basically looks at innovative approaches to address challenges and demands from utilities, and we try and provide a step-by-step approach to initiating and maintaining reforms into utilities, which are basically contributing to the Sustainable Development Goals. The other one is the innovation platform. Here, we also sort of trying to expose utilities that we're working with to new technologies that can address their service challenges, but also help them sort of twinning with other utilities and learn from each other from experiences they have in terms of technology integration into their service delivery, let's say, programs. However, more is needed in terms of integrating new technologies. And Zach, you spoke to some of the sort of areas where you see digitalization sort of supporting service delivery beyond some of the early sort of trials that we've had, for example, on meter reading or in management of service delivery processes or customer services. I think there's a number of opportunities actually in water supply utilities enhance service delivery, be it asset management, non-revenue water reduction, for example, billing and collection, operations. And I know this is primarily focused on water supply, but I mean, we are more and more trying to look at integrated service delivery, meaning looking at the entire cycle, so water supply and sanitation. So one of the aspects is really trying to bring together all these elements of and enhance the circular economy when it comes to service delivery at city level. And I think that's where innovators come in and bring in sort of data science and intelligence techniques to help those utilities address some of the business problems. And some of the questions we're looking at is like, how can we enhance resilience when it comes to water supply services and the issues that I mentioned about the circular economy, and we integrate the elements of sanitation. More and more we've been hearing about fecal sludge management. How can we do that efficiently? And how can we reach the unserved again on a more efficient manner? And just to give you an example, that's what exactly Lilongwe Water Board, one of the utilities I'm working with, is currently doing. A few years ago, they benefited from a GSMA grant and partnered with some innovators to develop a smart technology for managing water kiosks. And we now sort of scaling that up with financing from the bank. And that was really important during COVID response, because it helped them reach to more people and preventing contact, which is one of the contributors to COVID sort of spread. So these are some of the examples that I wanted to give. But going to your question regarding scaling up, a few things that I think you should consider as you develop your technology. I think the first one has to do with focusing on outcomes and contributions, and contribution to the service delivery. I mean, goals. I know as innovators, you guys are very smart and, you know, with great ideas, interesting things that you've been trying out. But the ultimate goal for some of the utilities and for us as financiers is how can we take this smartness into actually access to services, into serving the poor, into addressing some of the inefficiencies we have when it comes to, for example, collection, revenue collection, to water losses. So making sure that this proposal that you have on the table do actually speak those ultimate objectives is very important. One element, for example, that utilities have been looking at is how can we efficiently deliver good quality of service. These two elements not always are not always aligned, because usually they look at the costs and how best they can deliver that without necessarily sort of affecting their financial health. So if you can come up with solutions that can actually help them do that efficiently, that will certainly be an area that they will embrace. The other thing is about risk management and balancing between testing and adapting as you develop the technology. And I think it's very important that as you design it, you actually think about your risk management strategies and perhaps even risk-sharing arrangements that you can bring to the table, and be transparent about that. Because, you know, there is in many of these utilities a lot of inertia when it comes to, you know, transformation and change, because they're used to the way they do things, they do business and so on. So, I mean, bringing in elements of risk mitigation that have been thought through and are clear to everybody will help them sort of manage that. The other thing is about being flexible and making sure that you bring you build in elements of adaptability. Not everything will be clear. I know Minaj was saying that some of the things he could have sort of dealt with at the design stage, but I think also having the sort of flexibility to adapt some of the elements as you go, and sort of build in that into the process, and make sure that your stakeholders do understand that there will be elements of adjustments because you are learning, you sort of enhancing the technology and so on is important. And lastly, bear in mind regulations. And potential barriers that may come with that, including at times capacity limitations. It may not be that the legislation or the regulations do not allow for these technologies to be applied, but sometimes it has to do with limited capacity. So if you can build into your development process the engagement with regulatory authorities, and even depending, of course, on the funding that you have and so on, even elements of training, because those will help you build the partnerships that are required for you to open up the fields for testing and try out things and innovate. So I'll stop here and happy to respond to any questions. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that. I think really a lot of interesting things that kind of chime with what else was coming up around, risk, really demonstrating the value, and the solution really having a clear outcome that's solving a problem, and the flexibility points chimes a lot. So we've got a little bit of time left because there aren't a huge number of eligibility questions which have been answered in the chat, and I'll address right at the end. But there is one very good question from Razul around, we see a lot of testing, but coming out of pilots that never fail and never scale. I wouldn't say never scale. I think we have some insights around solutions that really have scaled. But I agree, there's a lot of testing, and then there's a huge gap between a pilot project and something really taking off. So I think that's a really excellent question I want to put to the panel. I think maybe starting with you, Minaj, talking about some of your scaling challenges and how they were overcome, and then Rodney, I'd like to turn to you because I think you support a broad range of companies on these exact questions. So it'd be brilliant to hear your perspectives on that, and then Odette, maybe back to you at the end. So yeah, this question, never fail, never scale. Over to you, Minaj.
Yeah, no, I think I'll come back to a point I raised earlier, the match funding requirement. I think sometimes what may happen is you may get a great funder to 100% finance something for a utility, which in theory sounds great because it removes any friction of the utility from at least piloting your solution. But then all you're doing is delaying the awkward conversation of who's going to fund it. So I think for us, the forcing function of the application to have a very clear match amount really forced us to have that kind of a conversation upfront with Takawasa and say, look, if the value is going to be providing safe water to these beyond the pipe people, we need you to come forward and commit resources upfront. And that escalated the conversation. It created a whole different kind of dynamic than I think if we just raised, let's say, 25,000 or 50,000 pounds and just kind of deployed a few systems with a pilot, where we would go to the managing director and say, hey, here's a risk-free pilot. We're going to do it all, which is how I see a lot of the pilots start, is there's no kind of financial skin in the game of all the parties. So I really like that feature of this grant, and I think that'll help change the narrative on this pilots never fail, never scale. But I would say the second thing is, pilots never fail, I feel, because they're always over-resourced. And so, I'll allude to my comment I said earlier, it's great that we get the GSMA to pay for a utility partner to go to Sri Lanka for a week and get his mind share. But naturally, I won't be able to do that when I'm talking with Chattogram Wasa or Kulna Wasa. And so So you kind of have to be careful of not getting too used to some of the external help. And you have to kind of then think, okay, how do I leverage this, but not have it hard coded into my scale up? Because that's just not sustainable for me to be able to, one example is we were able to go to the World Congress. I was a speaker in the ministerial forum. We were able to get FaceTime with the Minister of Telecom. Those were great, but like coming back, I mean, that's not going to happen every time we want to scale in India, for example. And so I think to that point, what I realized then is Akawasa, our anchor customer, has to be focused as the clear customer for us, and they have to be our champion. And I've had a lot of investors also push back when I wanted to scale too early and say, Takawasa is our diamond. We have to polish it, resist the temptation to scale so quickly, and have your pilot now scale to other geographies. Perfect it so well, be the clear market leader in your one area, and then have that customer testimonial kind of drive your scale. So then all of a sudden it's like no longer me trying to raise funding to scale, but it's actually my kind of relationship with the one customer that's actually having him refer to other utilities and having that drive the scaling journey. Those are my two immediate reactions. So.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much. Just a quick note. I mean, we've got this panel and this question. I plan to run just 5 minutes over at this point because we're at this point. But Rodney, great to hear from you on this question.
Yeah, thank you, Zach. And I think Manoj covered a lot of very good points. I think the important one that Manoj mentioned is I think you need to go into the piloting with not only the technical or service outcome, but the business outcome for you in mind, the longer term business outcome, and get that commitment from the customer, of course, or the end user. But also what we're doing, for example, in Vietnam with one application is we're not only getting commitment from the end user, but commitment from partners in country. So helping us to implement, but with some commitment to help scale with other solutions as a part of that partnership beyond the pilot. And then I think, lastly, another example in Vietnam where we're working with Saigon Water, which is the largest water system in the country, where they have a legitimate problem, we have a solution. So we are capitalizing on that, not only to get their commitment for buying more units after the pilot, but to get their commitment to support the growth and to be, again, as Manoj said, a mouthpiece for the technology as it's going forward. So I think sometimes it boils down to just good business principles, but those are some specific examples of how you can do that to scale from the pilot.
Really great. And Adet, I think the last word is with you. And I have a little question I'd like to add to it, which is where you see there being mismatched expectations between innovators and you as the bank and your capabilities in terms of your ability to work with them, and if there are any issues in scaling in terms of expectations around DFI financing and what it can do versus realities of how you work.
Thanks. Minaj and Rodney covered this question very well. I think, the issue of a right set of partnerships is important, and of course the commitments as Minaj mentioned. But for you to be able to get that, you need to have a very good plan, and a plan that not only covers your development stage, but also your scale up process, and you sort of look into the risks and make sure that everybody on the table do understand the pros and cons and how you plan to move forward. So I think that is critical. But the other thing is also your ability to identify opportunities. And to main things to sort of consider when it comes to opportunities. There are a number of investment programs, some of which, are just following the traditional sort of design approach, and they're kind of, sort of sleeping there and waiting for some light to, getting into this digitalization sort of environment. So as you develop your proposals, look out for these investment programs. The bank has a number of those across the globe. And as I said, it has opportunities for you to develop those. And sometimes it's just that people feel like, this is too much of a big investment program for me to reach out. And you sort of think small. So there are opportunities out there. So just reach out, and if needs be, reach out directly to us as well. We're happy to sort of facilitate that dialogue. And that happened in the case of DACA, for example, where the bank actually facilitated or was part of the dialogue with the client, and the same in Lilongwe. So reach out and look out for these opportunities. The other thing is, there is that say, turning crisis into opportunity. And that's what some of the utilities are doing with COVID. COVID has opened up space for us to bring in some new ideas and scale up things very quickly. I know we're making mistakes in the process. It's fine. It's part of the learning exercise. But I think it's the right timing for you to actually start having these conversations out of the box with utilities. But also, again, when I talked about regulations, please bear that in mind, and what are the key sort of stakeholders that are involved in that process, be it Ministry of Finance, the regulators themselves, and so on. So make sure you sort of engage them in the process. Now, on your second question, Zach, I think the one of the challenges we have in the water sector in particular is the lifespan of the water investment programs. It's because we have relatively complex sort of infrastructure that is required to actually move the needle when it comes to enhancing services. The technology will come to help them sort of sort out some of the system issues and so on. But for you to actually have impact, you will need to have a pipe network that is operational. You need to have a treatment plant that is operational. So matching these two is sometimes challenging, and that's why I think tapping into those opportunities where you already have sort of investment programs and you can plug in some elements of innovation makes things relatively easier. The other thing that we do that is a challenge generally in the environment where we work have to do with procurement sort of regulations and how this work when it comes to, partnerships, because we normally have to go to tender and you have to apply and so on, you compete, and sometimes you don't have that experience that is required, even though you have a great idea. So this is an area where the bank is working in and sort of trying to find more flexible ways to support research and development within the project and bring in those elements of innovation. But I think it's also important as innovators that you, in some cases, look out for larger partners that can sort of give you the cushion to get into some of these larger procurement packages. I'll stop here.
Yeah, thank you so much, and a brilliant note to end on. I'd just like to say thank you so much, Rodney, Minaj, especially joining from very early morning, and Rodney very late at night. It was an excellent discussion. Yeah, it's been a real pleasure. Turning to wrap up, I think there's a few questions, all which have been answered in the chat around what's eligible, in particular the outcomes. What I will say is refer to the terms and conditions document there. The outcomes, we don't define them. It's socio-economic impact. So all of the solutions mentioned potentially improve services for low-income populations, which is the ultimate aim. A critical question, and it touches on what the panel said, is demonstrating this and demonstrating it within the context of a project, and that is critical. And it links to the learning agenda for the fund that we outlined, covering either the partnerships, how to scale these models, building out the evidence base, or testing new and innovative solutions. If there are any further questions, or if you have a solution, you'd like to ask a specific question, there's an email address for that, gsmaif@gsma.com. And through that, you can get in touch with the Innovation Fund colleagues who are responsible for this and get answers to your questions. I think that's it. That's where I'll wrap up today. Thanks again once to the panel. Do review the terms and conditions, do look at the FAQs, and please do apply. Thank you.